Well, good afternoon, Indiana. Welcome to our final episode of This Week at the Indiana Statehouse. I am joined today by MADVoters Director of Advocacy, Katie Rector. Katie, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Scott. Love the intro there too. That was nice.
Thank you. Yeah, do a little graphics work on the side.
Sure.
It's fun. If anybody needs any, by the way. So, So listen, Katie, it has
Mhm.
been a pleasure, first of all, and an honor to be able to
Thank
do
you.
these with you guys.
Mhm.
MADVoters always does fantastic work. You have been on top of it for this entire session at the State House, and I could not do what I do without you. And you provide such a valuable service to Hoosiers, and I just want to shout out MADVoters once
Thank
again from
you.
the rooftops.
It's a team effort. We have fantastic volunteers who, we've got some folks who track the bills, and then we have some folks who watch the live streams, all day, every day, post up and watch them so that they can give minute by minute updates on things and take notes on, what was said. And folks who then go through the spreadsheet and update that. So it's such a privilege to work with such a good team, and a really good space where we have, people that are skilled in so many different areas and have so much knowledge, can come together and share that knowledge. So it really is just such a synthesis of all kinds of different skills, and it's really neat to watch it come together. And I was really pleased with the work we were able to offer to Hoosiers this year, and our tech team, of course. Integrating it to the website to where this year now you can go there and it'll tell you automatically who to call. You don't have to take extra steps to figure out, is it my representative or my senator? Is it a committee chair? It was all right there. So I was really happy that things came together the way they did this session.
Yeah, you guys did great, and it's one of the things we'll talk about here as we go into this thing. We mentioned, who to call, your rep, your senator, committee chair, right? Well, there's still a choke point on some of these bills that have passed through the legislature. A lot of them still await Governor Mike Braun's signature. So there is still a place where we can put pressure on him for the bills we don't like,
Sure.
or ask him to sign the bills that we do like. And we will encourage folks to do that throughout.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a great reminder too about, the importance of checks and balances. And, the governor's office is not on the ballot in 2026. He's got a few more years, but it's a great example, I think, of, if things were different, and we had a different person sitting in that governor's office, who had the power to veto some of these bills that we're really concerned about. I think, they could have had that check against them. So just, a little plug there, like, we're in this for the long game. And, we've got elections in 2026 for the State House, and then the governor will be up again in 2028. But we can really affect massive change, not just here at the State House with Bill Watch, but it all connects together, through the elections as well.
And we will close with that and talk about what MADVoters is going to be up to after the session, now that this is over. Because just because the session ends doesn't mean your work stops, certainly.
Nope, we are year round.
So yesterday, Friday, and forgive my pronunciation, many decades ago, I took Latin in high school, and I would pronounce the end of the session sine die.
Sure.
I think maybe we pronounce it differently here in Indiana, but that is the name of the session, and it just means we're adjourning until a time to be determined, the beginning of the next session. They don't exactly have a date announced yet. For example, this past December, they called the legislators into session early to go through the redistricting debacle. And
it should be January 2027. Knock on wood, the next time that they convene. But yes, of course.
Knock on wood that we don't have any more, garbage like that, or a special session like we had in 2022 to take away women's rights to choose. So tentatively, we're looking at probably the first week of January 2027 before we come back into session. So until then, let us summarize what happened this year in the 2026 session. And it's kind of a mixed bag, but I guess let's get the bad news out of the way first. And we can start with Senate Bill 27. Now these, now that they have passed, are, I guess, Senate Enrolled Act
Yeah,
bill.
they'll
The
switch their
governor
name.
signs
So
them. Is that right?
yeah, so an enrolled act just is like it's law. So it'll, these SBs and the HBs will become SEAs and HEAs. The numbers will stay the same. So yeah, it'll switch to SEA 277. It's the same thing. So
Hopefully
that was
not. Hopefully we can convince Governor Braun to veto this thing. But
yes, that would be
but
great.
alas,
It's
Senate Bill 277 at this point is
mhm.
a environmental deregulation bill.
Yeah, it's a big deregulation bill. The concern here is it's leading to a loss of accountability. It's turning mandatory environmental protections into optional actions, and it's going to allow the environmental management agency to basically choose, if or when they respond to things like pollution or enforcement of regulations, which is such a shame because Indiana ranks so poorly for industrial
Right. We're
pollution.
already relatively deregulated as states
Yeah.
go.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Our environmental regulations are lax.
Yeah. Very, very poor water and air quality. So yeah, this was like the wrong direction. So it has passed. And ultimately, I think it's going to come back on taxpayers because there's going to be some sort of cleanup that's going to have to happen, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. We're going to have to do something about wetlands. We're going to have to do something about the coal ash ponds. Like the piper's going to come, knocking, and at some point it's going to cost a lot in infrastructure dollars to fix, and that's a shame that we're sticking future generations with that bill. In addition to like
And
the negative health
healthcare
impact.
dollars as well.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're going to pay for this in terms of our health, in terms
Yeah.
of shorter lives, in terms of hospital bills, and
Uh-huh.
it's disappointing. So Hoosiers
It is.
sounds like not benefiting from this bill. Who benefits?
No,
Right.
and I
This
do
is
want to shout
polluters. This is
out,
big
like,
business.
yeah, it's totally like a handout for big business and polluters. Yeah, and big industry. And we know that they're wanting to bring in data centers here to the state. That's not something that Hoosiers want. I mean, across the political spectrum, people don't want it, but it's something that our political leaders want because then they can say, "Oh, look, we're creating jobs." Even though data centers don't really take that much jobs. I mean, yeah, you've got construction, but then what? But I do want to shout out, like Earth Charter and some of these environmental organizations fought really hard against this. And I mean, they almost had this thing beat. Like it passed 53 to 45 in the House. Okay, there's only 30 Democrats. So that means, 15 Republicans joined. 53 to 45 is pretty close. I mean, it's majority. So it was just over the hump. And then the Senate, it was even close, 27 to 21. So, I mean, a handful of votes and they would have had it defeated. So there was a lot of advocacy that they did, in those groups, Earth Charter and others. And I just, winning looks a little different when you're dealing with a super majority, when you've got a party that's, 3 or 4 times greater than the minority party. So to get numbers that close in a super majority situation is great. It's really good work. And I think it just shows that like this legislation wasn't super popular.
Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, maybe lawsuits will happen out of it. Even if it gets signed into law, it's not necessarily done. So
So yeah, that's sort of the phantom choke point that we don't really talk about, right? We talked about our reps and our senators and our committee chairs and even the governor now, and asking him to veto these bills. Well, then you have the judicial checkpoint, and a lot of this stuff is going to be subject to lawsuits.
Yeah. Speaking of judicial checkpoints.
Yeah, hey, nice transition, by the way. And so this next one, House Bill 1033, I feel like it came out of nowhere.
It did.
Or
It was
it
not on our
under the
tracker at
radar.
first. No, they
Yeah.
didn't. They added this language in because at first it wasn't really a bill that was within our scope. We weren't tracking it. And then it was flagged, by one of our live streamers, hey, check out this bill. So they added in a provision near the end, giving the governor the authority to appoint judicial appointments just in Marion County. And we've seen this before, I mean, he came in and now he has control over IU's board of trustees. They gave him last session control of IU's board and their governing body. And so now Governor Braun is going to get to appoint the judges instead of legal experts, in the bar and stuff doing this decision making. It's a massive erosion of checks and balances. We're supposed to have these co-equal branches of government, and yet now we have the executive branch, kind of with a thumb on the judicial branch. So that's very concerning.
This one is particularly egregious, I think. And it sort of pairs with one we're going to talk about here in a minute, where the state legislature is taking over
Yeah.
democratic functions of the most populous county, the most populous city in the state, Indianapolis. And wouldn't you know, that's a majority minority city. And I think these things reek of racism, they reek of paternalism, and
Yeah.
are anti-democratic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of like the redistricting thing, if you can't make it the way you want it, just rewrite the rules, So that's a problem. That's not how government and democracy is supposed to work.
Yeah, well, hey, speaking of executive overreach, this next one along those lines, incredibly dangerous. We've been on this one, I feel like, for the entire session, and this is House Bill 1343, which now passed. I can't see Governor Mike Braun vetoing this. That would give him the power to basically deploy his own personal militarized police force anywhere in the state, right?
Yeah, it grants police powers to the National Guard. They would have this, special military police unit. It would be the governor gets to deploy it. Just lots of concerns about the militarization of police. And there was a really great quote. I need to go back and clip it from Senator Vanita Becker. I think she was the only Republican senator to dissent. And she basically said, like, the police is here to protect and serve communities. The military is here to, protect us from enemies. And when you mix that, then who's the enemy and what's actually the job supposed to be done now? And she said it much better than I did. But it was like, just the way she said it was such a succinct and good summary of what are we doing here? Who is the real enemy? Because I think we all see the writing on the wall, what the point of a bill like 1343 is it's to tamp down on civil rights and try to extinguish any sort of political dissent. So, I mean, that's not what they said it was about, of course.
Of course not.
That's what it's about. So yeah,
they always have lovely euphemisms to describe things like this.
Yeah.
Oh, it's to protect us from things like the Boston Marathon bombing, I believe, was the example.
That's what they tried to say.
That was,
this is about.
my God, almost 15 years ago at this point.
Yeah. So that was one, and then that that's statewide, of course. But then in terms of this executive overreach, and Indianapolis again was 1423.
Yes.
And so that one is taking the elected school board powers, or the powers away from Indianapolis Public Schools elected school board, and sending that over to an all-appointed board. And it's a new, like, extra level of bureaucracy they're adding. So, tax dollars, now there's a whole nother layer of bureaucracy there. New executive director of this board, they're going to get paid, and it's made up of a lot of pro-charter interests. And so, it passed pretty much on party lines in the House. The Senate, it was interesting. About a quarter of the Republican senators opposed it too, but it wasn't enough to stop it. And that has been one that has been hard fought from day one. Every time it went to committee hearing, there were people and organizations showing up talking about, this is a violation of democracy and this is taxation without representation. I mean, this board that's going to call all these shots in Indianapolis now, they're not elected. They're appointed by the mayor. So
right now, and this is, in Indianapolis, at least for the last several years, has been a quote unquote blue city with a Democratic mayor. But so this is not handing power to the governor; it's handing power to the mayor of Indianapolis. But still, one individual and not a democratically elected board.
That's
and with Democrats like Joe Hogsett, who are pro-charter, pro-school privatization, who needs Republicans? And they cracked the door open on this one in last session. So like you said, this has been fought from day one. We've been hearing about this for a year now, at least. where they, I believe last year they passed a law that mandated that the city explore this, and
Mhm.
then now this is to codify it.
Oh yeah, and I mean now the charter schools get access to property tax dollars. You don't hear as much about private school vouchers anymore because that fight's they've won that fight, at least for now. The Indiana State Supreme Court said that tax dollars can go to these religious schools, and the year before they opened up the budget to pay for vouchers, for any income level. And so then they set their sights on charter schools, and so that's like this next layer of school privatization is these so-called public schools, but they're privately managed with private boards. Play
Right,
active
and
in public.
a profit motive. Yeah,
Yeah.
these folks are out to make money, and if they're not making money, they've been known to just shut the doors and say, "Oh, sorry, school's closed.
Yeah.
Tough
Yeah.
luck. Find somewhere else to go to school."
Yep. It's definitely a well-documented problem, but it's still one that it's like we're living in two realities, and we keep hearing lawmakers talk about, charter schools are innovative, but the data doesn't support those outcomes. So it's a shame.
Along the lines of living in two different realities, I feel like this next one, Senate Bill 1, this was the Senate Republican supermajority's only priority bill this year. This is all they wanted to get done,
Yeah.
and it sort of makes Hoosiers pay for the right wing rabbit hole these guys have gone down with, like, YouTube creators telling folks that there's rampant waste, fraud, and abuse in government services in other states, and now our guys here are like, well, we got to make sure that doesn't happen in Indiana, even though it wasn't really happening. And when there is fraud in the public in public services, it's always on the provider end, not the user end. So tell
Right.
us about Senate Bill 1.
Right. So, I mean, Senate Bill 1 is basically codifying the big, beautiful bill, the federal one here in Indiana. But when Trump's bill passed, it mandated states make some of these changes, but it gave them sort of a spectrum of ways they could enact these changes. Indiana's SB 1 is the answer to that, and it is the sort of the strictest interpretation. And so what it is it's adding more, it's tightening eligibility. So basically making it so fewer people can access SNAP, your food stamps, and Medicaid. And they said, we're going to tighten eligibility so there's no fraud, but there isn't fraud, like you've already said, Scott. And all this is doing is just kicking eligible people off of getting supports for healthcare and for food. And so definitely a concern there. It's not actually solving problems. And it's costing a lot of money just in terms of the administrative workload, because now they have to do all these additional verification checks, all this paperwork. And that doesn't actually like improve food or healthcare access. It's just you're paying someone to, do all this paperwork, but there's not actually a corresponding benefit to people.
It's ironic.
Probably. Oh yeah, well, you'll see a lot of procedural disenrollment. So people who get kicked off their program even though they shouldn't be.
So they'll say, "Oh no, we're not kicking people off of SNAP. We're not kicking people off of Medicaid. We're just making sure the right people are on there." But what it is it's an additional bureaucratic hoop. It's extra paperwork, and they're hoping to save money by having people get so frustrated with the extra hurdles that they give up.
Right.
People that would be eligible.
Yes. And ultimately, when you have fewer people, with health insurance, you have more uninsured folks, that just drives up healthcare costs. I think, we talked about reality versus rhetoric. I think the reality of what's going to happen out of this bill and the big, beautiful bill too, at the federal level is completely the opposite of what they intended or what they said they intended. And it did pass on party lines, unfortunately.
With several of these bills, Katie, I can't help but notice that it seems like the party of small government, quote unquote, is adding additional layers of government.
Yeah.
Here's extra bureaucracy, right? To verify all this. That's going to
Yeah.
take people. It's going to take government employees.
Mhm.
There was the National Guard thing. That doesn't seem very small government.
Nope. Nope.
The extra bureaucracy at IPS.
Yeah.
Again, more government.
Yeah, it doesn't
So
make any sense at all. It's just it's more costly, it's more, paperwork and more bureaucracy, and those are all things that they say they oppose, but that's why it's so important to be able to dig into these kinds of bills because there's rhetoric, that they say they're about, and then there's the reality of what these policies actually do.
going back up to 277, they cut the bureaucracy for their big industrial donors. They increase the bureaucracy for regular everyday Hoosiers.
Yeah. Yep.
This next one, let's change gears here and talk about Senate Bill 76. This was probably one of the more controversial bills this session.
Yeah. So this is the one that at the State of the Union the other day, President Trump, referred to this as being gold standard legislation, which is a red flag. It's a first. So Senate Bill 76 is the one. It's a big immigration bill. It's mandating the Indiana law enforcement, public schools, universities, local governments cooperate with ICE in immigration enforcement. And this is a bill that got stricter, and more intense as it went through. They added a $10,000 fine if the school or the city or whatever entity doesn't comply. And so lots of concerns here, about basically forcing Indiana to hitch its wagon to ICE, which is just on a runaway train right now with a seemingly endless budget and no accountability, no oversight. So it is just, you see what happened in Minnesota, and you just are hoping that we aren't going to have some sort of tragedy unfold here, but it almost seems like it's a matter of time, because there's no checks and balances. And
I understand ICE has set up a field office now in Carmel.
Yeah.
And I also understand that they at least want to purchase a warehouse somewhere in the city to house some 8,500 people. To concentrate them in an area. And so it's not a concentration camp; it's a concentration warehouse, Katie.
Right. And how much money did that cost or how much would it cost, to create this warehouse to house these folks? It's mind boggling. And it's one of those, you just want to tell people, wake up, think about this. They kept saying we want to just deport all these criminal people. Then why do we need a warehouse then? That doesn't make sense. And just the amount of money that they spend on that, gosh, that could have fed and clothed and given healthcare to so many people.
Priorities,
Priorities.
What are we spending our money on? You hear that a budget is a moral document. I have heard this phrase before, and it really is. It tells you what your priorities are as a society, and you really see things like this, and just ICE in general tells you what the priorities are for the Trump administration and their Republican lackeys here in Indiana. So along those lines, 76, one of the things that they would do in that bill is mandate that schools cooperate with ICE. Here's another bill that has to do with education and what we should be teaching in our schools. And this is Senate Bill 88.
Yeah. So, a couple of years ago, there was all this, with the Moms for Liberty push, all this, we don't co-parent with the government. The school needs to just focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic. And now it's like the pendulum swung the other way. And now they want to impose all of these more conservative values. You really think, it's a pretty significant swing, really. And just being very out in the open about, we're going to just push Christianity now. At one point, this bill was the one that had the 10 Commandments in it. They did take that out. But one thing that they kept in there is including the instruction on waiting until marriage to have children as part of being a good citizen. It was just citizenship, really? It's kind of a weird, and it's a dog whistle. It's a religious conservative dog whistle. There's also language in there to sort of mandate that colleges accept the classic learning test, which is like a SAT or ACT. But that one doesn't really have. Hey, I have a co-pilot here. That one doesn't. It doesn't have data to support it, and it's often used in. Just a minute. It's often used in like conservative Christian private schools and homeschool type situations.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's kind of like DEI, like for all the criticisms they leveled at it, all the unfounded criticisms. Well, like this is it kind of in reverse. This is what they said they didn't like, but now it's in their favor, like you have a test that's more biased to, religious conservative Christian principles. And they're basically saying, oh, this is the same as the ACT, SAT, but it's not. It doesn't have data to support it. As problematic as the ACT and SAT, can be as well.
Yeah. Standardized testing in general has its problems, but yeah, this does seem like, well, if you can't pass the ACT or the SAT, we'll give you this thing and have a pathway to higher education for these folks. So I guess so disappointing. So disappointing. Now another one. Here we are in introducing Christian nationalism into the schools. And when we say, you said these are bills pushing Christianity, it's pushing a very narrow, specific view of Christianity, not a widely accepted accepting, loving Christianity, a very narrow, strict, patriarchal Christianity. And Senate Bill 200.
This one is, it like raised our red flags, and critics would say like, okay, well, we don't need to worry about this. Basically, this bill only applies to certain youth patriotic organizations that are outlined by the federal government, like the Boy Scouts and stuff. And because our concern with this is paving the path for Turning Point USA. And to that, we would say, we hear you, as of the moment of this passing, this bill does not provide a pathway for Turning Point to enter into the schools. But the appetite is there at the federal level to make those changes, to grant Turning Point USA and the youth chapters, to grant them, that access. And we also know that we also know that Governor Braun wants to make a partnership with Turning Point in schools. I'm going to get him situated, and I'll be right back.
All right. Yeah, very good. So,
do you want to talk about, do you want to skip down to 285 real quick?
I can filibuster for a moment while you take care of that, because I'm going to talk about the fact that, all of these last several bills, and we talked about 1423, and that was the one that takes over Indianapolis public schools. We talked about Senate Bill 76 that forces schools and other organizations to comply with ICE. We talked about Senate Bill 88, where they're imposing, a very narrow Christian conservative worldview be taught in the schools. And then again, Senate Bill 200, which opens the door for Christian conservative organizations like Turning Point USA into our public schools. And you can see what they're doing is it's a slow takeover of our educational system, imposing their far-right Christian nationalist values into the public school system. So not only are they whittling down the public schools through these things like vouchers and defunding them in that way, and making it easier for folks to send their kids to private schools, private Christian schools that are teaching God knows what, and these charter schools, which again have relatively little accountability. Well, they're also using pressure to mandate what be taught in the public schools with bills like this. It's concerning, to say the least.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm back. Sorry.
you're all good. Well, and then look, along those lines, here's another one taking over the schools. Senate Bill 239. It makes it easier to convert existing public schools into charter schools.
Yes, and it also allows multiple charter schools to be opened under like one charter. It's just like less oversight, and they already have issues with fraud. Their board meetings are not open to the public. They're not accountable to the public. Just like the writing's on the wall, guys. This is not great. So lots of concerns out of there about what happens with the charter schools.
So I guess lot of bad news here, and we're getting the bad news out of the way. So let's get to our last bad news bill, and it's a baddie. It is. This is Senate Bill 285. We've been watching this one for a while, and this essentially criminalizes homelessness.
Yeah, it does. And this one, it was opposed by the Indiana Sheriff's Association. They said this is going to lead to overcrowding our jails. It's mandating that law enforcement have to interact with unhoused people in a way that, like the local law enforcement is supposed to know their community best, and mandating that they interact negatively, by issuing a citation with someone is just, it's the state inserting itself into this local control. And mandating they have to do things a certain way. So basically, with this bill, someone could end up with a misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 60 days in jail, $500 fine. They're unhoused. They don't have money. Like, it's insane. If they are sleeping on public land, and if the law enforcement officer comes back 48 hours later, if they're still there. So they get the warning first, and then if not, then they get picked up. So it was passed, but about a quarter of the Republicans opposed it as well, along with all the Democrats. So there was significant pushback, but unfortunately not enough to stop it from happening.
Again, Katie, it's big government, and it's not budget friendly either. We've seen it again. The studies are there. The numbers are there. It costs less to just house people than it does to jail them. Certainly.
Yeah. This was about punishing and controlling, instead of actually resolving the issues. It's not fixing anything.
So I guess, a lot of bad stuff. Let's sort of turn the corner here and talk about some other things. This next one is, I guess we could talk about it and figure out where we come down on it. But this is an unusual case where this is a Senate. This is a joint resolution to put a question on the ballot. To amend the Constitution in November. We talked about a lot of these other bills, and everything we just mentioned, all of those bad bills, none of them have been signed by the governor yet. We can call him and put pressure on him and say, veto these bills. Now, this one, the people can decide whether to approve or disapprove of this bill. Can you explain this one a little bit?
Yeah, there were like a set of bail bills. And so this is dealing with amending the Constitution, which is why it's a little different. And so they passed, the language for it. They've basically set up everything. So now the next step is this is going on the 2026 ballot as a question, and it deals with bail. There's concern here because it basically is expanding a judge's authority to deny bail. Right now it's basically you can't be denied bail unless you're in for murder. But now they're saying for substantial risk subjects, or you can't be, for substantial risk subjects now that bail could be denied. And the concern there is, is this going to lead to higher pretrial detention before someone's actually found guilty, innocent until proven guilty? Is it going to further overcrowd our jails? So ultimately, though, this one is going to be on the voters to decide, and it'll be on the ballot as a question. It'll say, shall the Constitution of the state of Indiana be amended to provide that a person charged with an offense other than murder or treason is not entitled to bail if, and there's a couple things, if proof is evident or presumption strong, and two, the state proves that no release conditions will reasonably protect the safety of the community. And so people ultimately get to pick if this actually goes through or not. And this is not something that we often see on the ballot because, unlike many other states, Indiana does not allow for citizen-led referendums and initiatives. The only reason it's going on the ballot is because the lawmakers are putting it on there. But things like abortion rights or legalizing marijuana, those aren't on the ballot because our lawmakers won't put them on there. And they could amend the Constitution to allow for citizen-led ballot initiatives, and it's been filed multiple times every year. It's just not something that they have allowed.
And that's a big lift. And it's the irony is that the citizens can't get these things put on the ballot because we don't have citizens initiatives.
Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
Right.
But that's why the lawmakers have it on there because it's amending our Constitution essentially.
Yeah. So let's look at we talked about Senate Bill 1. That was the Senate Republicans' only priority bill. The House Republicans had 3 or 4, I want to say, priority bills that they were trying to get pushed through. Let's talk about the big 2, and that's 1001 and 1002. And these, I understand, you guys didn't really take a position on these because there were a potential for a bunch of amendments. So how did they turn out? I guess let's look at 1001, and this was about they say it's about increasing housing affordability.
Yeah.
Did the final version do that?
Maybe. 1001 it was more controversial. It passed, but it was not unanimous. It was about a 3-1 vote, but it wasn't really on party lines. You had kind of a mixture. It does seek to improve the supply of housing, especially affordable housing, by cutting some red tape. The issue, though, is it's really kind of preempting local zoning and taking over local control. And to that you say, well, is it okay to take away local control if the goal is good? Does the end justify the means? Or is it not okay? Do you want communities to be able to say, well, we don't really want, these housing units in our communities? So, there's good and bad to it. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. If, it actually does result in the creation of good quality, affordable housing for folks, that's a win. But if it results in a bunch of shoddy housing and we don't have renters' rights here in Indiana, that's another bill that they keep ignoring and rejecting, then we're creating issues. So it really is going to, I think, depend on what happens. And my fear is, just with deregulation, like with the environmental one, ultimately consumers pay the price. So I really hope that's not the case with this one.
And you got to assume that this was being pushed by the builders who, well, they donate generously to both parties.
Yeah. But we also know, affordable housing is a huge issue right now. So there's definitely opportunity too for this to be a win. So we'll see. But
it's still out, huh?
Yeah, I would say so. The one that was more popular was 1002. That one passed nearly unanimously. It deals with utility affordability, which is a huge issue. I will say, the bill itself it's a step in the right direction. There were a lot of amendments proposed that would have given more immediate relief, like making utilities tax-free, and those were all rejected. So what we got left with is it's decent. It could have been better. But ultimately, it's focusing on rate-making processes for utilities, having a little bit more oversight over them, penalizing the utilities if based on their performance and their affordability. And it does have some language about having financial assistance programs, moratoriums on electricity shutoffs during the summer. So there's some good movement there. And that one, again, went through almost unanimously. So that one's a little controversial.
All right. So, we've gone through the bad news. We've talked about a couple that are sort of meh. This one seems better. And then there is a fair amount of good news still that came out of this legislative session. So, let's spend the rest of our time together talking about the positive things
Yeah.
that came out of this year's session. And
There
were
were
a couple of these that we talked about, I believe, through the year, but let's focus particularly on House Bill 1036.
This one passed unanimously out of both chambers, so that's great. It's going to require DCS to conduct an in-person assessment before closing an investigation on kiddos, just ensuring that kids aren't slipping through the cracks. So that one was a good one to get through. Another one sort of dealing with children was 1177. That's improving childcare. Basically, it's incentivizing businesses to provide childcare, and it's also giving communities access to the TIF revenue. TIF revenue is usually for like infrastructure, and so now they're treating childcare as infrastructure, as it should be. I mean, that's when people look, people look at communities and like, do I want to live here or not? They look at the infrastructure, and childcare and the availability of childcare is huge. So that one was another one that passed unanimously, and that should.
Yeah, and we could talk about, Katie, if I may interject just briefly, that treating things like childcare human infrastructure, right? That was we're taking minor steps with bills like 1177 here in the state of Indiana. If you look back at the federal level a couple years ago, this was one of the things that President Biden was pushing for in his original Build Back Better bill. All of the good human infrastructure got cut out because Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema pulled him out of there. The Republicans were going to be against him regardless, but and then we wound up with like the Inflation Reduction Act, much of which has been gutted by the Trump administration since. But there was a good way to deal with this upstream, I think, that got left on the cutting room floor.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's one of those, we still have issues with our childcare workers, not being paid a good wage for the incredibly important work they do. There's still massive childcare desert, so it's not the perfect solution, but it is a step in the right direction. It's one of those, like, finally, I mean, we could have nice things if our lawmakers could get it together.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to poo in the punch bowl there. We were supposed to be talking about the good stuff now.
No, but I mean, yeah, I mean, it's when we look at party labels and partisan affiliation, you have to look further than the label. You have to look at the values and people's commitments. I think we get stuck too often in this, what letters by the person's name, and we give people a pass, and we don't hold our side accountable.
100%. I always say it's not red versus blue or left versus right. It's top versus bottom.
Yeah, definitely.
So, so we talked about a couple of good bills that passed, but I think most of the good news is bad bills that failed.
Yeah,
and
a lot of them,
the next one was particularly heinous, and it failed to pass. So that is a good bit of news. Yeah. Let's talk about SB 236, the abortion bounty hunter bill.
Yeah, this was one that seemed poised to pass because it went through the Senate pretty quickly, and then it just died in the House. They wouldn't schedule it, which thank goodness, because that one would have banned abortion pills. It would have enabled citizen bounty hunters, that could be awarded $100,000 for finding these abortion pill distributors. This one was just insane because these are medications that are safe. They're, long proven effective. They have other uses besides abortion. And so treating these as like a criminal matter is just going to have such a chilling effect on our healthcare. So very, very good news that failed.
And also big government, right? Big government in your bedroom, in your schools, and at least this one did not make it through. Thankfully, now, Katie, is that a case of where pressuring a committee chair worked, and
I think
just sort
so,
of
yeah. I mean, I don't think that the House Republican committee chair, loved this bill, and I think that people were able to, assertively, respectfully, but assertively, say from, the whole time, like, we don't want this. It sort of gives them an out, like, I don't like this bill, and look at all the, the people don't like it either. So it really shows, the importance of advocating. And I mean, this is a huge one. This is the state that passed the first abortion ban after Roe. I think people, if people were like, they'll pass it anyway, we could have lost this one. But because people lobbied against it and paid attention and showed up at committee hearings and called their lawmakers, they didn't just take it for granted, and we were able to defeat this one. And that's a huge deal, because they tried this as a bill in itself. They tried to sneak it as an amendment. It didn't come through at all, thank goodness. And same with the next
another one that was also very targeted, a minority group, and this one would have essentially erased trans and non-binary Hoosiers from any sort of legal recognition. Thankfully, this did not pass. Can you fill us in a little bit on this one?
Yeah, this is SB 182, but they also tried putting it in kind of like the abortion pill one. They tried sneaking it in as an amendment to a few different bills, and it didn't go through. And it was really focused just on policing people's gender identity. The language sort of differed depending on if you were looking at the bill or the amendments that it was offered as, but basically it was saying, sex and gender are the same thing in Indiana code, which that's not accurate. I mean, there's so many chromosomal differences and subtleties,
Right.
In human biology. It's not simply XXXY, even though that's what the bill authors kept saying. It's just simple. It's black and white. It's like, no, it's not. It's like basic science. And so, by basically saying people are either XXXY, all, trans Hoosiers, non-binary Hoosiers, intersex Hoosiers, where do those people go? They basically just erase them and say you don't exist. That one, got thrown out. And then it also had language.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that our trans and non-binary friends in Indiana are not necessarily out of the woods because this thing didn't pass. We still have the ban on gender-affirming state-issued ID that was enacted by executive order, because Mike Braun, as the governor, has certain power over agencies like the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and also a thing that we have to keep an eye on, because the states share these things. In Kansas right now, just this week, their state, I don't know if it was the governor or the state legislature, but through their state Bureau of Motor Vehicles, basically said anybody who had received a gender affirming ID, it is immediately invalid. You must return and get one that matches your sex at birth. If you don't, you are subject to fine, or you're driving without a license, or what have you. And some of our more extreme Hoosier lawmakers are gonna get ideas. Seems.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we are a state that a couple of years ago we had the slate of hate, all those anti-LGBTQ plus bills. So yeah, I mean, it's a good point that, we haven't suddenly flipped and we're, some sort of super safe affirming state. We're certainly not. And I think, like your example with Kansas, taking away people's, ability to drive to vote, because the ID for voting. Because they're transgender. I mean, I think that's something, if you had said that a few years ago, people would say, oh, that'll never happen. Well, here they are doing it, and they're not, they're just sort of throwing it through, like through executive orders and stuff that, maybe the courts will hammer out later, but the damage is sort of done at the beginning by throwing out all these executive orders, because it creates that culture of, we can just unilaterally, take away rights from people, whole groups of people. It's very concerning.
Very, very concerning. So we'll we're going to keep an eye on things like that. This bill failing, this bill going down, a good development, but there's still things to keep our eyes on. Let's talk about Senate Bill 4 briefly. This was one that maybe one where language got moved from one bill to another bill? And
yeah, so at first, it was a bill that we weren't, wasn't really within our scope. Then we started watching it because it had some concerning library funding language that was going to basically say, like, it was going to turn budget approval for local public libraries over to the local government. Of course, there, that could result in your library being defunded if your city council or county council, didn't want to give them the funding. Well, then they took that language out, had some good language in this bill, dealing with requiring like a fiscal impact analysis be done on any of those executive orders, that we talked about. So some accountability there of figuring out how much all these executive orders would cost. They also added language for providing some additional funding avenues for child care vouchers. So SB4 ended up being a good bill. Unfortunately, they did take the library language out and put it into a different bill, 1406, like last minute. So there is some concern there for library funding, unfortunately, in a different bill, but not in this one.
And did that bill wind up passing then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they changed it in a conference committee, behind closed doors. These committees are all meeting at different time, or all at the same time, rather. They're switching things in and out, and the library funding got stuck into 1406 there at the end.
Okay, so let's call this one a mixed bag.
This bill itself it seems good. They took out the concerning things, and there was some good wins in that one. And I did reach out to the Library Federation because I'm curious to see their thoughts now that the dust has settled on that language. So.
Senate Bill 91, however, unequivocally a good bill.
Yes, this was great. It did extend Indiana's syringe exchange program to 2031. It was a little touch and go there for a minute, because this is scheduled to expire this year. And so they needed this bill to pass in order to keep the syringe exchange program. It helps reduce the spread of HIV and hepatitis, and also destigmatizes addiction. There were some standouts who opposed the bill, talking about, it's going to increase drug use. It's like, no, it doesn't. It destigmatizes it, and it makes it safer, and it improves health outcomes. So that one did pass, thank goodness.
And a longer extension than I think we were betting on. I know at one point this thing originally was intended to extend the program for another 10 years. They whittled it down to 2, and then they bumped it back up to 5.
Yes. So kind of in the middle, but ultimately, the end result was a good one. 225 was another good one too. That increased the oversight of hospital business practices, protects patients from some aggressive debt collection practices, and requires more advanced notice of hospital closure. So a good step. There was a Meteor bill that would have had better patient debt protections. That was SB 85, and that one died. Yes. It didn't clear one of the deadline hurdles. So this is a little bit of a weaker version than that one. Still a good bill.
Still a positive development. Also a positive development was this sneaky thing, I believe, last week. Maybe not this week, but the week before. I don't remember. They don't blend together. But where they tried to sneak some language about reducing early voting into one of these bills.
Yes. So there was an amendment that was filed in committee after the public comment period to change early voting from 28 days to effectively just 15 days. And, collectively, voters and coalitions of organizations said, wait a minute, this is a massive change. You can't just do this without public input. Not to mention early voting starting here in a few weeks. The counties have already figured out all their plans, and now you're going to change it on them. So thankfully this did not move forward. They ended up just killing the whole bill. But that was huge. And again, I think, it's this whole session, I would say, was defined by the power of advocacy. When we look back and at the very beginning with redistricting, we defeated that because of advocacy, because of people power. The abortion bill, that was one, again, that could have sailed right through. This is a legislative body that was, chomping at the bit to ban abortion. And same thing with this, with the early voting. This could have sailed right through and passed, but people were paying attention and they said absolutely not. And so it failed. Thank goodness, because people are paying attention.
Yes. Final thing we wanted to mention, and you mentioned it in passing before, this language appeared in multiple places. It kept popping up to mandate that the Ten Commandments be displayed in public school. Then it was like, well, okay, they can display the Ten Commandments in public school, and the original bill died. The language got moved into another bill, also got pulled out. So a win there for religious freedom, at least a little bit. We talked about a bunch back up above where not such great results for religious freedom.
Well, they've sort of co-opted this term religious freedom, right? I mean, religious freedom is supposed to be freedom of and freedom from religion, not this imposition. And some folks in our legislature seem to think that freedom of religion means, they have the freedom to impose their point of view on others. So yes, the Ten Commandments is not a historical document that belongs in our public schools, unless they want to put up all religious, guides and everything. And that's just that wasn't the goal of this legislation. They were trying to shoehorn in the Ten Commandments. So that one failed. The school chaplains too. That was something that they've tried for a couple of years now. That one didn't go anywhere. So I think we are seeing, we're in a funny time period, right? I mean, we are in the thick of, the Trump administration, the Trump regime, MAGA. But at the same time, I think people are starting to really see like those policies are not actually helpful, so they have all this bravado and bluster, and at the state level too, but their effectiveness is very poor for all these policies. And I think people are starting to sort of call them on it. Of course, we still are seeing terrible policies like the immigration bill and the Medicaid SNAP bill, SB1, those are going through. But we're seeing, I think, some of the culture war bills sort of walking back a little bit, because I think people are realizing they're not effective. They're not making my utility bills lower. They're not helping improve healthcare accessibility. They're not improving housing. So we're seeing some wins. It's a long game, and we're going to keep our nose to the grindstone.
About that, Katie, I guess I want to ask, now that this session is over and our lawmakers aren't going to be back until most likely the beginning of January next year, what is on MADVoters' plate? Because I know you guys don't stop working when the legislature wraps up. You got plenty to still do.
We are focusing on mobilizing people for the primaries in May. So to do that, there's voter education, there's engagement, there's voter registration that needs to happen. So, we are going to be working on that, getting some education put out there, supporting some of the candidates that reach out to us that are on the front lines of democracy, making sure that they have the resources they need, and getting folks to turn out at the polls for the primary in May. And then, of course, the candidates who win in the primary will go on to be on the ballot in November. We're also looking ahead to No King's Day, March 28th. We plan to be involved with that. To encouraging folks to get involved there. And our website's got an events page where we've got some of the No Kings events listed. And you can see kind of what we're up to next. So now our political engagement department is really going to take off and help get all the voter guides and voter education materials ready.
And you will be doing the MADVoters Verified Politicians program again this year, the MVPs.
Yes, we will. Those are candidates that align with our values. And so we'll have that information available for the general election so that people know what's on their ballot and know what they're voting for. Because it's not just about the party label, it's about the values and pushing back against the status quo, making sure that we've got people in office who are actually going to fight for working families and these progressive values.
Fantastic. So I guess with what little time we have left, we got less than a minute to go. Sure. Where can people find more information about you?
Go to madvoters.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, all the socials. We put out a newsletter as well. And we are entirely volunteer powered. So if you want to help us produce some of the voter education materials, reach out to us on our website. Tell us you want to volunteer with us, and we'll get you plugged in.
Fantastic. Well, Katie, thank you for doing this, for being along on this journey, for allowing Progressive Indiana Network to share your advocacy work and the information that you've been putting out there for voters. It has been an honor.
No,
So
thank
thank
you
you,
guys
and
for being
hopefully
the
some other work
microphone,
too.
amplifying. It's the information does no good if it doesn't go anywhere. So I really appreciate you all amplifying and sharing and getting it out there.
All right. Well, we will remain in touch, and certainly it will not be 2027 before we talk to you again. So,
No,
Katie
nope.
Rector, MADVoters, thank you so
Thanks
much
a
for
lot.
your
I'll talk
hard
to you
work.
soon.
All right. Bye bye now.
Bye.